Yesterday, I reported on an early review of the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D, but coming from a not particularly well-known website. It was certainly the first that I had heard of them, and I think their whole idea of getting the the CPU early, releasing the review early, is to, get a bit of a name for themselves, generate some search traffic, all of that. Well, we now have AMD's claims here, but I want to validate them against other review sources and look at the, the review we looked at yesterday. How does that compare to Tech PowerUp, a much more trusted and well-known name in gaming? Nothing against the other source, but it is nice to get some multiple independent reviews and put them up against each other. So, it looks like Tech PowerUp has also released a review. This is a Video Cards article about that. And to be clear, I want to compare a couple of things directly against the review we looked at yesterday. One thing is the Tech PowerUp review is using a different memory configuration. So let's talk about that for a second. So in Tech PowerUp's review, they're using the 5800X 3D with 2x16 gigabytes DDR4 3600 CL16. There's the full timings. Whereas the review I looked at yesterday was using 3200 CL14, which is also very fast because, while you lose the 3600, it goes down to 3200. You also have faster timings. So this is just a different setup. I believe that review also used a 8 gigabyte stick configuration rather than 2x16. And then in this review, they did not match the Intel memory. Instead of using the same DDR4 setup that they used on the AMD platform as in the other review, at Tech PowerUp's review, they used two 16 gigabyte DDR5 6000 CL36 sticks. So this is a bit of a different comparison when it comes to the memory configurations. Also a different suite of games, although some of them do overlap, although we don't know if they're benchmarking the same area of the game, which can influence results. And I bring that up because in the other review, the one that I talked about yesterday, we saw certain games have a pretty outsized lead for the 5800X 3D using this configuration and their benchmarks here. However, Tech PowerUp got very different results in this exact same game. So in this one, we see a significant lead for the 5800X 3D in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. But if I pop over to Tech PowerUp's review at 1080p, and again, could be a completely different part of the game, all of that, it's a different memory configuration. In this one, they actually have it as, basically a tie, although their tie does put the 12900K and KS ahead of the 5800X 3D. So it's looking like we are either seeing very different results based on the memory or based on how this was tested, where it was benchmarked. I don't know, but I think this is so interesting with the reviews on these. It's down to either different results in the same games, different memory configurations, but then also just different games seem to respond very differently to the cache, right? So I'm not going to show you all of the games in the Tech PowerUp review, just like I didn't show you all of the results in the review yesterday, because I do want you to have a reason to go to their websites. I want to give you my thoughts on these reviews, but not steal their entire reviews. So definitely go check out their actual websites. But also just notice, again, that there's very different results depending on exactly which game they're like this seems odd to me here. They've got a 12600K, actually, it's basically a tie, but slightly ahead of the 12900K and 12900KS. But that's one thing that I want to point out here, and what I will look at from the Tech PowerUp results is some of their overall averages. Because AMD has claimed, I don't know if they claim average. I think they do say average. They think 15% higher performance than their own 5900X. But again, this is going to depend a lot on which games you look at. Oh, I forgot to do my trademark. A few of you complain about, and a lot of people like. Anyway, when I shrink myself. But anyway, here's some relative performance charts from their reviews. And I think that this is pretty interesting. So they're setting the 5800X 3D as the 100% baseline. Then we can see other chips line up against that. So we actually can see that in Tech Power-Up's testing, the 5800X 3D is near the top at 720p and 1080p gaming. The 12900KS, if it has a lead, it's not a significant one. We're talking 1 or 2% at most on average. Again, individual game results can be very different. But then they're not showing quite the same large gap that AMD was claiming on average. So, for example, on the 720p results, which would be the most CPU limited, we're seeing not even quite a 10% jump from the 5900X, whereas AMD was claiming a 15% average. But again, I think that's going to depend a lot on the particular game suite that you use. So I don't think AMD was like completely off the mark there. And if we want to claim world's fastest gaming CPU, well, it might at least be a tie with the KS version. And it's also true that when AMD was claiming that, the KS wasn't out. Just Intel kind of beat them to the punch. And then the pricing difference on these is quite different as well. So I'll give you some more thoughts on this towards the end. If we look at 1440p and 4K results, obviously we're going to become more GPU limited. Although this is also more realistic for somebody buying this price of CPU, unless you're just really into the competitive scene and you're looking more at 1080p high refresh rate. But anyway, at these, it's all basically a tie near the top, right? At 4K, because you're hitting that GPU limit where all of those processors are able to push your GPU pretty much as far as it can go with current GPUs, although we'll get a new refresh of GPUs in the future. But like for me as a 4K gamer, a 12400F is going to cost me so much less and basically get me the same performance because I'm going to be GPU limited, right? Although, you could think about the longevity of that. And then at 1440p, again, it's all kind of truncated here at the top as we reach more and more GPU limits. But at 1440p, they actually did have their 5800X 3D at the top. So I think claims of world's fastest gaming CPU are reasonable, although it's definitely not in every game. It's going to depend a lot on which game or suite of games you're looking at. And so overall, some of the final results here are that at 720p, which is their most CPU bottlenecked, they're saying that the 5800X 3D is a 10% boost over its 5800X original version without the 3D V cache, and that individual games could show incredibly different results. They saw that with Borderlands 3, it gained 43%, and that Far Cry 5 is very memory sensitive at plus 35%. So, this is complicated. But to me, the biggest differences here are that I don't think anybody thinking about buying a 12900K or KS especially would be thinking about buying the 5800X 3D. I think the 5800X 3D doesn't even make a lot of sense if you're just buying a new platform right now at all, although maybe it could. I think it makes the most sense for somebody upgrading. If you already have a compatible motherboard, but you're on an older Ryzen, and I don't mean upgrading from an already Ryzen 5000 series processor. I think if you're already on like a 5600X for example, I think for just flat out gaming, you're not really gaining much going up to the 5800X 3D, at least not enough to be worth that price jump. But if you're on something older, and you just want to slot in the best gaming CPU to increase your longevity, I think that could make sense. Although you want to seriously consider whether the $199 5600 non-X that just recently came out would meet your needs for a lot less money. And if you really need 8 cores, and that's what you're more concerned about, you might want to check if the 5700 that recently came out would also meet your needs, because you are gaining, maybe 10% or so here, maybe a little bit more, and certainly in certain games a lot more from the X3D. But remember that also in applications rather than gaming, it's actually losing some performance on the clock speeds. which actually brings me to one of the last things I want to talk about, which is overclocking. So all signs point to you can't overclock this. That's what AMD says. And that would also be another advantage for the K-series Intel chips if you then just overclocked them to gain some more performance. If the 5800X can't overclock, then, what does that mean? But wait, take a look at this article I just saw this morning. So at WCCF Tech, I'm seeing it reported that we're already seeing 5800X 3D overclocking is maybe possible. So what's going on with this? So AMD has claimed that it doesn't support overclocking for this reason. So AMD's Robert Hallock, the Ryzen 7 5800X 3D CPU has overclocking hardlock to avoid physical damage to the 3D V cache. Okay, it's due to the voltage curve. When their Zen 3 chips reach up to 1.5 to 1.6 volts with overclocking, the 3D V cache that sits on top of it can only do 1.35 volts, and it's already running at that limit out of the box. So if users try to overvolt the chip beyond the voltage curve, they could break the chip, and that's why they're not supporting it. AMD said that it will enable memory and FLCK, flock. Guys, I don't usually say that out loud. I just read it. Anyway, is there a, overclocking for the chip. But here's the thing. We're now seeing tweets talking about, wait, this actually is overclocked. So from, I think it's Scatterbencher over here, we're seeing screenshots with the voltage, I think, under control, but we're seeing the core speed up over 4.8. Okay? And that's not the speeds that the chip is supposed to be running at. So this is very, very clearly, we're getting an overclock here. So wait, how did that happen? So he's saying that he's using ASUS voltage suspension to make it work properly. He's also saying that, as expected, worse than the average Ryzen 5000 chip. And he can get up to 2133. They're talking about the Infinity clock here. But with getting some errors, 1900 megahertz is stable. So anyway, more details I'm sure to come. But it looks like for the determined overclockers out there, you might still have a chance at doing something with this and playing with it a bit, but I have a feeling it is going to be a lot more limited than what you could do on a normal Ryzen 5000 chip. Now, speaking of overclocking and AMD, I'll leave us with this final article, which is, first of all, if you're building a new system right now, and you don't really need to build a new system right now, that's what I meant about the 5800X 3D maybe not making the most sense for somebody who's building right now, because again, it is at the end of a platform. Whereas we're going to see the Zen 4 platform coming out soon. And with that in mind, apparently AMD is at least making some big claims that their first DDR5 platform, the Ryzen 7000 for gaming, is Raphael. And one of the awesome things about Raphael is that we are really going to try to make a big splash with overclocking. And I'll just kind of leave it there, but speeds that you maybe thought couldn't be possible may be possible with this overclocking spec. So that's interesting. Now, I believe that this was in the context of discussing DDR5 memory. So I'm not sure how much they're talking about the actual CPU core overclocks versus the memory overclocks. But either way, interesting little tidbit. And I do think people should seriously consider, if you don't need to build right now, we are getting towards new GPUs, new CPUs. Although, again, people who held off last time, ended up out of luck in terms of availability and scalper pricing and all that. Anyway, I've got to get to work, so hopefully this was an interesting comparison with our last review, and hopefully my rambling first thing in the morning when I didn't sleep much was at least somewhat coherent. I hope all of you have an excellent day.